It didn't come as a lightning strike. It came as a slow spill, like water creeping across a table you spent a lifetime polishing. My son sued me. He did it with the smile of a dentist about to pull a wisdom tooth. He thought I was old, weak, finished. He forgot that the oldest roots grip the tightest. I was ready to pull down the entire forest to save myself. My name is Margaret Rousseau, but those who know me call me Margot. I am 68 years old, a retired librarian living in Newport, Rhode Island, in the house my parents left me. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a grey, miserable day, the kind of chilling rain that seeps right into your bones and reminds you that winter is coming. My morning coffee sat untouched on the table next to me, long since gone cold. A tired-looking process server, his rain jacket slick and dark, handed me the thick manila envelope. He refused to make eye contact, just pivoted on his heel and retreated down the slick flagstone path as if fleeing a contaminated zone. I closed the door and opened the envelope right there in the entryway. My hands were shaking. It was not the tremor of age, the slight palsy that sometimes annoyed me. It was the electric thrum of pure, unadulterated rage. The paper felt heavy, stiff, expensive. The smell of the laser printer's ink was sharp and chemical, and there it was, printed in a stark, merciless font, Julian Navarro versus Margaret Rousseau. The petition was clear. It demanded the immediate return of stolen inheritance pertaining to the estate of his father, Arthur Navarro. Stolen inheritance. The two words felt foreign, absurd, like a badly translated joke that made no sense. My gaze drifted past the living room, through the bay window to the garden outside. The hydrangeas were drooping, heavy with rain. Arthur had always despised that garden. He hated the digging, the dirt under my fingernails, the hours I spent cultivating something that wasn't him. He had been dead for 18 months. 18 months of blessed, complicated silence. 18 months of rediscovering the person I was before he consumed all the air in the room. And now, this, Julian, my son, my only child. The boy I had read thousands of stories to, curled up on the sofa, his small head heavy in my lap. I was the one who taught him the difference between heroes and villains, the vital importance of truth. And now he was writing his own story, a nasty, greedy piece of fiction, and he had cast me as the dragon hoarding the gold. I immediately remembered our last real phone call. It was a few weeks after the funeral, after the casseroles stopped arriving. Julian and his wife, Camilla, had called together. It was not a conversation of shared grief. It was an interrogation disguised as concern. They kept using certain words. Fairness? Legacy? What Dad would have wanted? I had dismissed it at the time as the vulgar, reflexive grasping that follows a death. I told them Arthur's affairs were settled, and I ended the call. I was wrong. It was not mere grumbling. It was planning. Camilla. This entire document smelled like her expensive, aggressive perfume. She is a high-end real estate broker from Boston, a woman composed of sharp angles and laser-focused ambition. From the moment Julian brought her home, she looked at me, at my house, not as a person or a home, but as an obstacle. I was a stubborn piece of antique furniture cluttering up a valuable ocean view property that needed to be liquidated. She had found the weak spot in her husband, his desperate, lifelong need to live up to the grand myth of his father, and she was pressing on it until it broke. My hand was perfectly steady now as I picked up my phone. I dialed his number. It went straight to the professional, breezy greeting he used for his clients. I did not raise my voice. "Julian, it's your mother. I've received the papers. What in the hell do you think you are doing?" I hung up. I would not leave a message. A minute later, my phone buzzed. A text message, not a call, a coward's text, just procedural. "Mom, my lawyer will be in touch. Don't make this complicated." Complicated. The arrogance, the sheer, blinding condescension of that word. I sat down heavily in the wingback chair, the one Arthur used to claim as his throne. I did not cry. The time for tears was over, decades ago. Instead, a sound escaped my throat that startled the cat sleeping on the rug. It was a laugh. It was dry, brittle, like old leaves skittering across pavement. It was a terrible sound, but it was wholly mine. "Complicated," I whispered to the empty, quiet room. "Oh, Julian, you and that dreadful wife of yours. You have no idea what complicated looks like. Not yet. 40 years. I was married to Arthur Navarro for 40 years. It is a terrifying length of time to realize you lived beside a stranger, or worse, that you knew exactly who he was and allowed the performance to continue for the sake of peace. To the outside world, to Newport. Arthur was a magnificent construct. He was Arthur Navarro, the financial wizard, the pillar of the community, the man who hosted the best 4th of July parties and knew every banker and politician by their first name. He was pure, uncut charisma, a man who walked into a room and seemed to suck all the oxygen toward himself. He was a master of the subtle diminishment. He charmed my friends. He charmed my family. And most of all, he charmed my son. But he always controlled the narrative. At those parties, he would wrap an arm around my waist, his grip just a little too tight, and say to admiring guests, "And this is my Margot, my brilliant little librarian. I rescued her from the dusty stacks." Everyone would laugh, including me. A performance. He made me the lucky one, the quiet, mousy woman who had somehow managed to land the lion. He needed me to be small so he could seem large. The truth was that the lion was hollow. Arthur Navarro was a spectacular failure. He was a gambler who used the stock market instead of a casino, and he was terrible at it. The vast Navarro wealth he hinted at, the foundation of his confidence. It was Rousseau wealth. It was my money. It came from my grandparents, from an old, quiet Rhode Island family that understood ships and land. Not the volatile derivatives Arthur found so fascinating. He burned through my inheritance like it was kindling. He called them visionary investments, or temporary market corrections. They were abysmal failures, one after another. Him throwing my good money after his bad decisions, always certain the next big win was just around the corner. Julian never saw it. He couldn't. A son wants to see a king, and Arthur wore the crown with such authority. Arthur promised Julian the world, filled his head with talk of partnerships, of the Navarro legacy he would one day inherit. Julian worshipped him, completely blind to the rot beneath the polished veneer. I said nothing. What was I to say? Your father, the hero, is a fraud. I chose to protect my son's memories. When Arthur died, I chose dignity. I paid the staggering debts he left behind, the secret loans and the margin calls. I paid them quietly, with the last of my own family trust, and I closed the books on the lie. Now, my silence is being presented as proof of my guilt. Julian, with Camilla whispering in his ear, has convinced himself that his father's financial genius must be hidden somewhere. There must be a secret trust. There must be offshore accounts in the Caymans. It is the only narrative that makes sense to him. His magnificent father could not have simply failed. No, he must have hidden the fortune. And I, the resentful, lucky librarian, am now hoarding it out of spite. I remember the reading of the will. It was just the three of us, me, Julian, and Arthur's exasperated lawyer. The will was pathetically brief. Arthur left all his worldly possessions to me, his beloved wife. The lawyer then had the uncomfortable task of presenting the final accounting, which showed that Arthur's worldly possessions consisted of a mountain of debt and a leased luxury car. Julian was stunned. He kept asking, "But where is the rest?" The house, this beautiful Newport home, was never Arthur's to give. It was bought with my money, in my name, decades ago. The investments that actually provide my income are mine, secured in a trust my father established to protect me. It was designed to protect me from creditors, and, as it turned out, from my own husband. Camilla cannot accept this. She is a real estate broker. She looks at this house not as a home, but as a multi-million-dollar asset. She sees the life I live and believes it was funded by Arthur, and that as Julian's wife, she is entitled to her portion. And Julian, bless him, is weak. He is buckling under the pressure of the lavish lifestyle she demands, weighed down by his own string of failed startups and catastrophic business deals. He has his father's arrogance, but none of the charm. He has chosen to believe the grand, comfortable lie rather than the simple, humiliating truth. Standing there in my entryway, the summons cold in my hand, I finally understood. This lawsuit wasn't just about greed, though greed was the gasoline. For Julian, this was about shame. He cannot live in a world where his father was a con man who lived off his wife. Suing me, the evil mother who stole his inheritance, is the only way he can keep his father's ghost alive. The cracks had been there for months. I had just been too tired from the grief, or perhaps the relief of Arthur's passing, to pay them proper attention. The lawsuit was not the first attack. It was simply the first one that was public. I remember the dinner, about a week after the funeral. The last of the sympathetic casseroles had been eaten or thrown away. Julian and Camilla came over, ostensibly to check on me. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the air was thick with things unsaid. We were picking at a roasted chicken I had no appetite for. Julian pushed a stray pea around his plate. He would not look at me. He never could when he was about to be his father's son. "Mom," he started, his voice muted. We need to talk about the books." "The books?" I asked, setting my fork down. "Dad's finances," Camilla interjected, her voice entirely too bright. She was already impatient. "His portfolio. We need to see the ledgers." Julian finally looked up, his eyes glassy with a practiced, dutiful grief. "Dad always said he had me taken care of. He promised. He said he was building something for me." The bluntness of it, so soon, stole my breath for a second. The lie was already taking root. I decided, in that moment, to meet it with the truth. Just once. "Julian, your father took care of both of us," I said, my voice low and even. "He did it with my money, the money my father left me." Camilla let out a sound. It was not a laugh. It was a scoff, a short, sharp burst of derisive air. "Oh, Margot, please." she said, leaning forward, her bracelets clinking on the table. We all know Arthur was the breadwinner. He was the most successful man in his circle. Let's not try to rewrite history just because he is gone. We just want what belongs to Julian. What belongs to Julian. The entitlement was astounding, a living, breathing thing at my dinner table. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to show an ounce of loyalty or even just basic decency. He just stared at his plate, silent. He was letting her speak for him. He was letting her call me a liar. "Get out," I said. Julian's head snapped up. "What?" "Get out of my house, both of you. Now." That was the last time we spoke with any pretense of civility. The war began the next day, but it was a quiet one. Julian started a campaign of whispers. I heard from my cousin, Eleanor, that Julian had called deeply worried about me. He told her I was confused in my grief. He said I was squandering the money Arthur had worked so hard to build. He painted a picture of a dotty old woman, vulnerable and irrational, burning through a fortune. Then came the legal papers, not the lawsuit, not yet. This was something more insidious. It was an emergency petition for a temporary financial conservatorship. He was trying to have me declared legally incompetent. He, my only son, was telling a court that his 68-year-old mother, a woman who had managed a library's acquisitions budget for 30 years, was no longer capable of balancing her own checkbook. The court threw it out. Of course. The judge barely looked at the paperwork before dismissing it as baseless. But the damage was done, exactly as Julian and Camilla had intended. The Whisper campaign now had the veneer of legal action. It was no longer just gossip. It was a failed court attempt. The isolation was immediate. It was subtle, but it was there. Old friends from the library guild would see me at the market, and their eyes would fill with that awful, condescending pity. Or worse, a flicker of suspicion. Was I losing it? Was I the bitter wife Arthur's son claimed I was? Invitations to dinner parties dwindled. Phone calls went unreturned. I was no longer just Margot, the witty, sharp librarian. I was Margot, the problem, the one in a family dispute, the one whose own son thought she was senile. They were trying to erase me before I could even speak. They were painting me as an unreliable narrator in my own life story. I sat by the window, watching the rain, just as I had the day the summons arrived. I realized this was not a fight about money. It never was. I could not care less about the money. This was a fight for my existence. They were trying to take my home. Yes. But first, they were trying to take my credibility, my reputation, and my sanity. They were trying to make me disappear. The petition to declare me incompetent was the end of Margot the victim. That attempt, so clumsy and yet so vicious, woke something up in me. It woke up the librarian. They wanted to cast me as a confused old woman more. This confused old woman was about to build a bibliography of their destruction. My first act was to hire Evelyn Hayes. Evelyn runs a small, razor-sharp firm out of a modest brick building far from the waterfront mansions. She is a woman of about 50, with greying hair pulled into a severe bun and a gaze that misses nothing. She does not suffer fools, and she does not believe in wasting time. I laid the summons and the dismissed conservatorship petition on her desk. She read them in silence, her expression unreadable. "Your son is a fool," she said finally, not as an insult, but as a simple statement of fact. She looked up at me. "And his wife is steering the car. They think you will roll over. They see your age. They see widow, and they smell an easy mark. They are mistaken, I said. Evelyn tapped the summons. They want to talk about Arthur Navarro's inheritance. Fine. Let's talk about it. We will not defend. We will attack. We will give them the entire, unvarnished legacy. By the time we are done, they will wish they had never heard the word. She was giving me permission to do what I should have done years ago. I went home. But I did not go to the kitchen to make tea. I went to the attic, to the rows of filing cabinets that Arthur had always called Margot's obsessive hobby. I was a librarian by trade. I cross-referenced my life. For 40 years, I had filed everything, every bank statement, every tax return, every half-baked business proposal Arthur ever drafted on a cocktail napkin. The grief, the shame, the decades of polite silence, I burned it all away. I was no longer a wife protecting a fragile male ego. I was a researcher on the hunt. I started with Arthur's private safe, the one he kept hidden behind a false panel in his study. I had known the combination for 30 years. He never bothered to change it. Julian and Camilla were probably dreaming it was full of gold bars and stock certificates. It was not. It was full of letters. Not love letters, but threatening. Crimson-stamped letters from creditors, collection agencies, and private lenders. There were dozens, dating back decades. He had been drowning, and I had been his lifeline, throwing him rope after rope of my own money while he smiled for the society pages. Then I found the file for Navarro Investments. That was the name he used for his grand, visionary company. It was a shell, and in 2008, during the crash that nearly ruined everyone, it was the shell that almost took my house. I found the documents a second mortgage on this house, a home equity line of credit for an astronomical sum. I stared at the signature on the line, Margaret Rousseau. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant forgery. He had signed my name to leverage my family home to save his fantasy company. My stomach turned cold. I remembered that year. I remembered the stress, the sleepless nights, his sudden insistence that we tighten our belts while he was secretly hemorrhaging my assets. I cross-referenced the dates with my own financial records, and there it was. The proof. I had found out. I had confronted him, and to avoid public humiliation, to stop the bank from foreclosing, I had used the principal from my own parents' trust to pay it off. All of it. In one silent, massive check. I saved my home from my own husband, and I never told a soul. I never even told Julian. I kept digging, the hours blurring. The sun went down, and I worked under the sharp glow of my desk lamp. I moved on to his digital files, the ones on the laptop I had locked in a drawer. I found an email chain from 3 years ago, just before Arthur got sick. It was between him and Julian. Dad, I need help. The angel investors are backing out. I'm going to lose everything. Arthur's reply was surprisingly blunt, tinged with his own desperation. There is nothing left. Jules. The market has been brutal. I'm tapped out. We are living on your mother's dime, and she does not even know the half of it. Do not ask me again. He knew. Julian knew his father was struggling. He knew the money was gone. And then, at the very bottom of a drawer, filled with old passports and expired insurance cards, I found the final piece. It was a single, folded document, notarized by a bank in Boston, a personal loan agreement, dated just 2 weeks after that desperate email exchange. It was a contract between Arthur Navarro as lender and Julian Navarro as borrower. The amount was for $250,000. It was for Julian's failed tech startup. I checked my bank statements from that exact week. I saw the $250,000 withdrawal from my brokerage account. Arthur had told me it was for a once-in-a-lifetime real estate opportunity. He had taken my money, given it to our son, and made our son sign a legal document. Julian had not just suspected his father was broke. He had known. He had proof. He had taken $250,000 of my money, failed to pay it back, and was now suing me for more. I did not laugh this time. I sat back in the chair, the notarized document in my hand, and I felt the cold, clear, beautiful certainty of victory. This was not a trial. It was going to be an execution. With the notarized loan agreement safely in Evelyn's hands, the next phase began. It was a phase I was uniquely suited for. I built a wall of silence. I am, after all, a librarian. I know the profound power of quiet. The calls started immediately, first from Julian, angry and confused. I let them go to voicemail. Then from his lawyer, a man whose voice was as slick as oiled patent leather, suggesting a friendly, off-the-record chat to resolve this misunderstanding. I ignored him. The emails piled up, shifting in tone from conciliatory to demanding. I read none of them. I instructed Evelyn to respond to all official correspondence with a simple, "We will see your client in court." To a bully like Camilla, silence is not strength, it is a vacuum, and she rushed to fill it with her own noise. Her social media, which was usually a shrine to her overpriced listings and designer handbags, became a memorial. She started posting old, artfully selected photos of Arthur. Arthur laughing on his boat, my boat. Arthur raising a glass at a charity gala, an event I paid for. Arthur with his arm around a college-aged Julian. The captions were masterpieces of passive aggression. Remembering a great man, a true provider, betrayed by those he trusted most. And a son's love is eternal. So is his fight for his father's legacy. I watched it all. I sat at my desk, the same desk where I had uncovered her husband's fraud, and I methodically documented her campaign. I took a screenshot of every post, every veiled accusation, every crocodile tear spilled for her followers. Each post was a new exhibit. Each like from a mutual acquaintance was another name on a list. She thought she was building a public case against me. In reality, she was nailing the lid on Julian's coffin. This war required a budget. Evelyn was formidable, but she was not free. And I wanted more. I wanted a full forensic audit. I needed a professional to translate Arthur's chaotic trail of debt into the cold, hard language a court understands. I went to my jewelry box. I bypassed the pearls from my grandmother and the signet ring from my father. I went straight to the pieces Arthur had given me. The gaudy diamond tennis bracelet for our 20th anniversary. The sapphire earrings he presented after a spectacularly profitable quarter. I took them downtown to a jeweler I trusted. He confirmed what I had long suspected when I cross-referenced my old credit card statements. Arthur had bought them all using my money. He gave me gifts of my own assets. I sold them all. The entire collection of his performative generosity. It felt like cleaning a wound. I walked out of the shop with a certified check, and the money was in Evelyn's hands by noon. The forensic accountant she hired was a quiet man who looked more like a poet than a numbers expert. But his work was brutal. He delivered his report 2 weeks later. It was bound in a simple blue cover, And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever read. It confirmed everything. Arthur Navarro did not die with a secret fortune. He died with a net debt of $1.2 million. The report detailed the forged mortgage, the predatory loans, the siphoned accounts, and it showed, with corresponding bank transfers from my trust, how I had paid every single cent of it. Julian and Camilla, of course, knew nothing of this. All they knew was that I was silent. I was not fighting back. I was not calling, crying, or begging. To them, my silence was not methodical. It was fear. They believed the old woman was crumbling. They believed I had no defense. Evelyn called me. "They are taking the bait," she said, her voice crisp with satisfaction. "They just filed a motion for an expedited hearing. They want a summary judgment. They think you are terrified and want to force a quick settlement." I looked across my living room, past the garden, to the bookshelf. There was a small, silver-framed photograph of Julian. He was about 7 years old, asleep on a pile of library books, his face soft and innocent. I had taken it one afternoon, so proud of my little reader. It was a photograph of a boy who no longer existed, if he ever had at all. "Good," I said, my voice as cold and quiet as the room. "Let them have it. Let's finish this." It was 1 week before the hearing. The silence I had cultivated was apparently becoming too much for them. My doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon, a sharp, impatient sound. I was not expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach tightened. It was Julian. He was alone. He stood on my welcome mat, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked terrible. He was wearing an expensive suit that hung on him, and the skin under his eyes was puffy and dark. He looked tired. But as I opened the door, his posture straightened, the old arrogance settling back over him like a poorly fitted suit. "Mum," he said. He did not look at me. He was addressing the floorboards just past my feet. "This has all gone too far." I did not move from the doorway. I did not invite him in. I crossed my arms over my chest. "You were the one who started it. Julian." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation that was pure Arthur. "Look, Camilla. She just gets a little aggressive. You know how she is. She's just trying to protect our interests." He was already building his escape route, already throwing his wife under the bus. "Let's just end this. We can settle it. Right now." "Settle what?" I asked, my voice flat. "Just give us the house," he said, finally lifting his eyes. His gaze was hard, calculating. "That is all we are asking for. You can keep the investments. You can keep the stocks, the cash, whatever else you have. We will walk away. We will tell the court it was all a simple misunderstanding." I stared at him. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made me dizzy. He was standing on my property, trying to negotiate for my house, offering to graciously let me keep my own money as if it were a concession. He was acting like a magnanimous victor offering terms of surrender. The raw nerve of it, the absolute lack of any foundation in reality, was staggering. He truly believed the lies. He had wrapped himself so tightly in the myth of his father that he thought he was the one holding all the cards. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for the arrogance on his face to curdle into impatience. "No," I said. His face darkened. "No. What do you mean? No. I mean, no?" I repeated, spelling it out as I would for a child who could not grasp a simple concept. "This house is mine. The investments are mine. They were mine before I married your father, and they are mine now. Your father's money was an illusion. Your father's legacy was debt, and I am the one who paid it." He actually laughed. It was not the confident scoff Camilla used. It was a short, ugly, desperate sound. "That is your story," he snapped. "That is the lie you have been telling yourself. You will never, ever be able to prove any of that in court. You are just a confused, bitter old woman. The court will believe me. I am his son." He had backed me into the very corner his wife had designed. The confused, senile widow. This was his final move, the checkmate he saw. I let a small smile touch my lips. It was a cold, unfamiliar feeling. He mistook it for weakness, for a crack in my sanity. "Oh, Julian," I said, and my voice was suddenly very soft, the voice I used to use for story time at the library. I was a head librarian for 40 years. "What did you think I did all day?" His brow furrowed, confused by the non sequitur. "I always," I said, leaning in just an inch, "keep the receipts." I did not wait for his response. I closed the door, firmly, in his face. I did not slam it. I simply shut it. The click of the latch final. But through the small glass panel next to the door, I saw it. Just for a fraction of a second, before the anger and arrogance could rearrange his features. It was not confusion. It was pure, unadulterated panic. That was the first taste of victory. And it was delicious. The last week before the hearing was not chaos. It was calm. It was the absolute, pressurized calm of the deep ocean, the quiet before a storm. My preparation was methodical. Evelyn's office became my sanctuary, and she became my drill sergeant. We did not waste a single minute on sympathy. We prepared for war. She would sit across her desk, her face hardening, and she would become Julian's lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Her voice would adopt a slimy, condescending tone that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Russo," she shot at me, her eyes narrowing. "Is it not a fact that you transferred the sum of $500,000 out of a joint checking account? An account you shared with your ailing husband, mere days after his funeral?" I practiced. I kept my hands clasped in my lap, my back straight. I focused on a spot on the wall just over her left shoulder. It was my money, from my personal trust, which I had temporarily moved into that account to cover my husband's end-of-life medical bills. I was moving it back to pay the other debts he left behind. "Debts," she'd scoff, leaning back in her chair. "Or was it to ensure your son, the grieving child, would have no access to his father's legacy? Did you not, in fact, immediately begin liquidating assets that Mr. Navarro had earmarked for his only child?" "There were no assets," I replied, my voice a monotone. "There was only debt. I was protecting the estate from further claims. We did this for hours. We organized the binders. It was a librarian's dream and a con man's nightmare. We had the original trust statements from my family, dating back to 1985, proving the origin of every penny. We had the full forensic auditor's report, a masterpiece of cold arithmetic, detailing Arthur's $1.2 million net deficit. We had the bank records showing the forged signature on the mortgage from 2008. And we had our final exhibit, the one we kept separate, the $250,000 loan agreement, signed in Julian's own desperate hand. On our final day of preparation, Evelyn relaxed, her face returning to its normal, stern expression. "Now, you listen to me, Margot. You have the truth. You have the receipts. That is almost never enough. She leaned forward. Their case is nothing but air and grief. They have no evidence, so they will rely on theatre. They are going to paint you as a cold, bitter, jealous wife. They will say you resented Arthur's success. They will make Julian into a tragic figure, a devoted son who is just trying to honor his father's memory, a father who was stolen from him, first by death, and now by his own mother. She held my gaze. They will do everything in their power to make you react. They will try to make you weep. They will try to make you scream. You must do neither. You are not a wife. You are not a mother. In that room, you are a witness. You are a repository of facts. You will be calm. You will be boring. You will let me handle the fire. Do you understand? I understand, I said. I will be stone. When I returned home that night, there was a small, square package on my doorstep. I knew what it was. The pet crematorium had called the week before. I brought it inside, my hands steady. I opened the box. Inside was a simple, dark, wooden urn. It was the ashes of my old terrier, Buster. I had adopted him 6 years ago, a grumpy, one-eyed rescue nobody wanted. He had been my shadow. He died 2 months before Arthur. Julian had always refused to come inside the house when Buster was alive. He said the dog was dirty and smelled. Camilla, of course, claimed to be allergic. I held the small, heavy urn in my hands. It was the weight of uncomplicated loyalty. I walked over to my fireplace. I looked at the photos on the mantel. Most were of Julian. Julian at graduation. Julian at his wedding. Julian with Arthur. I took them all down, one by one. I removed the smiling, lying photographs and placed them in the desk drawer. I left only one. A very old, faded black and white picture of my own parents, standing on this very lawn, looking young and strong. I placed the small wooden urn next to their photograph. Well, boys, I whispered to the ashes and the photo. It's just us now. I realized, in that moment, that I was not fighting for the past. I was not fighting to clear Arthur's name or to save my 40-year marriage. That was all gone. I was fighting for this house, for this room, for my present. The courtroom was small, overheated, and smelled of stale coffee and damp wool. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sickly yellow pallor on everyone. It was designed to be claustrophobic, to apply pressure, to squeeze the truth out. I sat beside Evelyn, my back perfectly straight. I wore a simple, dark, navy blue suit. I had chosen it carefully. I did not look like a grieving widow or a confused elderly woman. I looked, as I had for my entire professional life, like a headmistress, a woman who does not tolerate nonsense. Across the aisle, Julian and Camilla sat at their table. They were a performance of unity. Camilla was dressed in a severe, expensive black suit. Her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull at her eyes. She was whispering constantly into Julian's ear, her hand resting proprietorially on his forearm, patting it, soothing him. They were the perfect portrait of a loving, supportive couple under siege. Their lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was everything I expected. His suit was too shiny, his watch was too big, and his smile never reached his eyes. He began his opening statement with a voice that oozed counterfeit sincerity. He spoke of the great Arthur Navarro, a man of vision and generosity. He spun a tale of Arthur's final wishes, his deep desire to provide for his only son. He painted a picture of a sacred legacy, A father-son bond that my actions, as the bitter and controlling wife, had desecrated. Then he called his first and only witness, my son. Julian walked to the stand, his face a mask of practiced sorrow. He looked at me once, a quick, venomous glance, before turning his full attention to Thorn. Mr. Navarro, Thorn began, his voice dripping with compassion. Can you tell the court what your relationship with your father was like? Julian's voice cracked. He actually produced a tear, a single, perfect drop that ran down his cheek. He was my hero, he whispered. He was my best friend. He promised me. He always promised he had me taken care of. And what happened after his passing? Julian looked down, shaking his head as if in disbelief. My mother, she just changed. He gestured toward me, not looking at me. It was like a switch flipped. She became cold, secretive, hostile. She locked up his office. She locked me out. When I asked about his affairs, just to help, she said everything was gone. She said his money was her money. It was like she was trying to erase him, like she hated him. And she hated me for loving him. He was good. He was channeling every ounce of his father's charisma, his father's victimhood. He was selling the story, and Thorn was leading him beautifully. I sat perfectly still. I did not move. I did not flinch. I just watched him lie, his face earnest, his hands clasped as if in prayer. When he was done, the room was quiet. He had painted the picture Evelyn had warned me about. He was the dutiful son. I was the monster. Your witness, Thorn said, sitting down with a satisfied sigh. Evelyn rose. She did not approach the stand. She stood from our table. Mr. Navarro, I have no questions for you at this time. A flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face. Thorn looked up, startled. We call Mrs. Margaret Rousseau, Evelyn said. I walked to the stand, was sworn in, and sat. Evelyn did not ask me about my feelings. She did not ask me about my grief, or my marriage, or my son. She was a surgeon. Mrs. Rousseau, I am placing before you what has been marked as Exhibit A. Can you identify it? I can. These are the establishing documents for the Rousseau Family Trust, dated 1985. And Exhibit B. That is a full accounting of all funds held in that trust, from its inception to the present day. And Exhibit C. That is the forensic audit of the estate of Arthur Navarro, prepared by the firm of Doyle and Associates. Evelyn's voice was a clear, sharp metronome. Mrs. Rousseau, what was the net worth of your husband, Arthur Navarro, at the time of his death? According to this audit, his net worth, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the small room, was negative $1.2 million. Camilla, who had been whispering to Thorn, froze. Her head snapped up. She stopped patting Julian's hand. And Mrs. Rousseau, Evelyn continued, can you identify Exhibit D? I can. It is a bank statement showing a wire transfer from my trust, the Rousseau Family Trust, paying off a fraudulent mortgage of $750,000 on my home, a mortgage taken out by my husband in 2008 by forging my signature. Objection! Thorn roared, leaping to his feet. This is irrelevant. The defendant's personal finances and the deceased's alleged personal debts have no bearing on the plaintiff's claim to his inheritance. Evelyn smiled. It was a thin, cold smile. Your Honour, the plaintiff is claiming an inheritance exists. We are simply proving, methodically, that it does not. Camilla's face, once composed and confident, was now a mask of rigid, pale fury. She was staring at Julian, not at me, not at the judge, at her husband. She had stopped blinking. Evelyn Hayes let the silence in the room deepen, allowing Thorne's objection and Camilla's frozen expression to hang in the air. I remained on the stand, a passive observer. Evelyn turned her attention back to the judge. "Your Honour," she said, her voice clear and devoid of triumph. The plaintiff, Mr. Julian Navarro, testified earlier this morning, under oath, that he believed a substantial estate existed. He has positioned himself as the victim of theft. She walked back to our table and picked up a single, bound document. "We would like to present our final exhibit, marked as Exhibit H. This document speaks directly to the plaintiff's knowledge of his father's financial state, 3 years prior to his death." Objection. Thorne was on his feet again, his face flushed. Relevance. This is clearly a personal document. It is a privileged communication between a father and son. It has no bearing on this case. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Maria Chanot said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You have built your entire case on your client's perception of his father's wealth. This document, according to Ms. Hayes, speaks directly to that perception. You cannot claim privilege in one breath and theft in another. I am allowing it." Evelyn didn't hand the document to the judge. She didn't hand it to me. She walked calmly, deliberately, across the aisle to the plaintiff's table. She placed Exhibit H directly in front of Julian. Marcus Thorne tried to intercept it, but Julian picked it up. Camilla, her face pale, leaned in to read over his shoulder. The entire courtroom watched. I could hear the scratching of the court reporter's pen, the hum of the old clock on the wall. Julian's hand began to shake. The colour drained from his face, leaving a pasty, grey pallor. "Mr. Navarro," Evelyn said, standing a respectful 5 feet away, her voice projecting to every corner of the room. "You recognise this document, do you not?" Julian stared at the pages. He looked desperately at Thorne, who was shuffling his own papers, refusing to make eye contact. That is a private agreement," Julian stammered, his voice half its previous volume. "It is a legal document, is it not, Mr. Navarro?" Evelyn pressed. "Please confirm for the court that the signature on the final page, under the word borrower, is yours?" "Yes," he snapped, his composure breaking. "Yes, it is my signature. But it was a family matter." "A family matter for $250,000, Evelyn stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "A personal loan from your father, which you have never made a single payment on. Is that correct?" From my vantage point, I saw Camilla. She did not gasp. She did not move. She simply pulled her hand back from Julian's arm as if she had been burned. Her eyes, cold and reptilian, narrowed, fixed on her husband. This was not the man who was promised a legacy. This was a debtor. She had been lied to. This was the first time she had heard of this $250,000 secret. Julian was coming undone. The blood rushed back to his face in splotchy, uneven patches. He sputtered, looking wildly from Evelyn to the judge. "I was going to pay it back. He said it was a gift. He told me it was an advance on my inheritance." It was the final, fatal admission. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were a scalpel. An advance on what inheritance, Mr. Navarro? The contract you signed explicitly outlines a repayment schedule. It calls it a loan. A loan you took just weeks after your father emailed you to say he was tapped out and living on my client's money. You knew. Did you not? She took one step closer. Julian leaned back, as if struck. You knew there was no money. You knew your father was in debt. You knew. And you took $250,000 from your mother's trust fund anyway. And after all that, you had the audacity to bring her to this courtroom, to sue her for an inheritance you knew, for a fact, did not exist. The air in the courtroom was so thin it was hard to breathe. It was a complete, suffocating silence, broken only by the scrape of a chair leg on the tile. It was Camilla. She had physically pushed her chair back, creating a visible 6-inch gap of empty space between herself and her husband. She was isolating him, cutting him loose before he could taint her further. Julian saw it. He saw her recoil. And that, after everything, is what finally made him break. The mask of the grieving son shattered, and the entitled, terrified child underneath exploded. She owed me, he screamed, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his mouth. He was standing now, one hand pointing directly at me. She owed us. She owed my father. He gave her everything. She had an easy life, a beautiful house, all because of him. Order. Judge Chanot's voice was like a whip, and her gavel struck the wood with a sound like a gunshot. Mr. Navarro, control yourself. Order. Marcus Thorne, his face ashen, was trying to pull Julian back into his seat, but Julian shook him off. I just looked at my son. I felt nothing. No hatred, no pity, not even the ghost of love. It was just a cold, sterile emptiness. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by this screaming, hollow man, and I had simply seen enough. The performance was over. Judge Chanot watched Julian sit down, his body thrumming with a visible, impotent rage. She slowly, methodically, adjusted the documents in front of her. She put on her reading glasses, picked up the notarized loan agreement Exhibit H, and reviewed it. Then she set it down and picked up the bound forensic audit. She read a single page, her expression unreadable. Finally, she took her glasses off. She did not look at Evelyn. She did not look at Marcus Thorne. She looked directly at my son. She was not speaking as a judge to a plaintiff. She was speaking as a woman who had run out of patience. Mr. Navarro, she said, and her voice was not angry. It was something far worse. It was tired. Your petition, the one that brought us all here today, states that your mother, the defendant, stole your father's property, that she is wrongfully withholding your rightful inheritance. She held up the thick auditor's report, its blue cover stark against the colour of the courtroom. The records, Mr. Navarro, show that your father had no property. Your father had debt. The records show that the only reason this house, she gestured vaguely toward the outside world, was not seized by a bank is because your mother paid off a fraudulent mortgage taken out by your father. She put the audit down. The records also show that you, Mr. Navarro, personally received the sum of $250,000, not from your father, but from your mother's personal trust fund, money she inherited, money which you have never made any attempt to repay. She folded her hands and leaned forward, her gaze boring into him. So, Mr. Navarro, I find I have just one question for you. Who, exactly, stole what from whom? Julian opened his mouth. A small, gasping sound came out, like a fish on a dock, but no words. The court camera, a small red light in the corner that had been permitted by the judge, swiveled and zoomed in, capturing his face in merciless detail. He went chalk white. Then a dark, blotchy crimson flooded his neck and face. Then, just as quickly, the colour drained away again, leaving him looking pale and sick. His eyes darted, desperate for a lifeline. He looked at Camilla. She was studying her fingernails as if they were the most fascinating things she had ever seen. He looked at his lawyer. Marcus Thorne was staring down at his legal pad, his head bowed in defeat. Finally, he looked at me. I did not smile. I did not glare. I simply held his gaze, calm, steady, and empty. I was a stone wall he could not climb. I was the truth he could not escape. Julian Navarro stood there, in the center of the courtroom, in the ruins of the lies he had built. He did not speak. He did not move. He just froze.